Hello everyone, and welcome. Let's get right into the story. Our main character today is Anna Garrett, a marketing coordinator living a stable life in Chicago. This is the story of how that life was systematically shattered when she discovered her husband's affair with her best friend, a betrayal that was only the first step in a conspiracy tied to her mother's death and a multi-billion-dollar corporation. If you want to follow her journey from rock bottom to justice, don't forget to subscribe and support this channel. 7 months ago, Anna Garrett believed her life was solid. It wasn't perfect. No life truly was, but it was stable, built on foundations she had helped lay and trusted implicitly. Her world was a 2-bedroom apartment in a decent Chicago neighborhood, the kind of place with exposed brick that looked charming in the autumn light and thin walls that carried the comforting, muffled sounds of neighbors living their own parallel lives. The carpet had a stubborn stain near the entryway from a bottle of red wine dropped 2 New Year's Eves ago, a memory that still made her smile. Her job was just as predictable. She was a marketing coordinator at Brennan and Associates, a mid-sized firm downtown. The work was routine: social media strategies for local restaurants, website redesigns for dental offices, email campaigns for boutique shops. It wasn't the high-stakes career she had once dreamed of in college, but it paid the bills, covered her half of the rent and groceries, and afforded the occasional dinner out with her husband, Mark. He was the anchor of her world. They had been married for 7 years, having met, she believed, at a dinner party thrown by mutual friends. He was a business consultant, a job that involved irregular hours, late-night calls, and occasional weekend trips. Anna had long ago accepted the rhythm of his career. She was proud of his drive, even when she felt the quiet sting of loneliness as she ate dinner alone, covering the plate of food she'd saved for him with foil and placing it in the fridge for later. Their relationship had shifted over the last 2 years. The small, almost imperceptible changes that a person dismisses as the normal erosion of time. Mark had become more protective of his phone, angling the screen away when she walked past or taking his calls in the other room. He was vaguer about his projects, offering broad descriptions where he once shared details. He had a shorter fuse, picking small fights over the way she loaded the dishwasher or how much time she spent talking to Chloe. Chloe was the third pillar of her stability. Her best friend since their freshman year of college, Chloe had been her maid of honor. She was the person Anna turned to for everything. Every Thursday, without fail, Chloe came over with a bottle of wine. They would sit on Anna's couch, talking about work frustrations, Chloe's latest dating disasters, and Anna's quiet concerns that she and Mark were drifting. Chloe always listened with perfect, sympathetic attention. "All marriages go through phases, Anna," she'd say, refilling her glass. "You two just need to reconnect. You're lucky to have a guy like Mark. He's so steady." Anna believed her. To question Chloe would be to question reality itself. This carefully constructed reality fractured on a Tuesday. Anna had woken up feeling a profound sense of wrongness, a cold nausea that sat in her chest and made it hard to breathe. She tried to ignore it, going through the motions of her morning. Shower, toast she couldn't eat, getting dressed for work while Mark slept in, claiming exhaustion from a late meeting the night before. By 10 a.m., she was at her desk, staring blankly at a social media calendar. The dread hadn't faded, it had intensified. Her hands were cold. Her heart raced. Finally, she walked into her boss's office and said she needed to go home. She expected resistance, but he simply nodded, his expression unreadable. "Feel better," he said, in a tone that sounded almost like relief. The drive home was quiet. She kept the radio off, her hands shaking slightly on the steering wheel. She told herself it was just a stomach bug, that anxiety was making it worse. But the feeling of impending doom grew with every block. When she pulled into their apartment's parking lot, she saw Chloe's silver Honda Civic parked in a visitor spot. It shouldn't have been strange. Chloe had a key. But on a Tuesday morning, when Mark was supposedly home sleeping and Chloe should have been at her own job, it felt deeply wrong. Anna sat in her car for a full minute, her mind racing to build innocent explanations. Maybe he got sick too, and she stopped by to check on him. Maybe they're planning a surprise for me. Each rationalization felt thin and desperate. She turned off the engine, walked across the lot, up the 3 flights of stairs, and down the familiar hallway. She put her key in the lock as quietly as possible, though she couldn't say why. The apartment was still. Not empty quiet, but occupied quiet. She stood in the entryway, her work bag still on her shoulder, and listened. That's when she heard it. Laughter, coming from their bedroom. Chloe's laugh. It wasn't the bright, open laugh she shared over wine. This was different. Lower, more intimate. A sound meant only for one other person. Anna froze, her blood turning to ice. Her brain screamed at her to turn around, to leave, to pretend she had heard nothing. But her feet, moving with a will of their own, carried her across the living room carpet. She didn't knock. It was her home, her bedroom. She turned the handle and pushed the door open. They were tangled in the gray sheets Anna herself had washed 3 days earlier. The scene was so blatant, so absolute, that it stole the air from her lungs. When they saw her, Chloe's first expression wasn't shame or panic. It was annoyance, as if Anna was the one interrupting, the one who was in the wrong. Mark scrambled out of bed, pulling on his jeans with a practiced efficiency that spoke volumes. This wasn't a first-time mistake. This was a routine. He looked at her not with guilt, but with impatience, mixed with a strange kind of relief. The charade was finally over. "Anna," he said, his voice calm, the one he used when he thought she was being unreasonable. "We need to talk about this. This isn't what it looks like." The absurdity of the statement was breathtaking. It was exactly what it looked like. Chloe sat up, holding the sheet to her chest with a false modesty that was insulting. She had the audacity to look at Anna with pity. "We didn't want you to find out this way, Anna," she said, her voice soft. "But honestly, this has been coming for a long time. You had to know things weren't working between you two. The presumption of it, that Anna should have known that her blindness was justification for their betrayal, cut deeper than the affair itself. How long?" Anna's voice was a stranger's, thin and hollow in the suddenly silent room. Mark shrugged, already buttoning his shirt. "Does it matter? Long enough. Long enough. Long enough for every I love you to be a lie. Long enough for every Thursday night wine session to be a performance." Anna looked at Chloe, the woman who had held her hand at her mother's funeral 6 years ago, and felt a void open up inside her. She didn't scream. She didn't throw things. She just turned, walked back into the living room, grabbed the duffel bag from the hall closet, and began throwing clothes into it. Her laptop, chargers, toiletries, the practical things one needs when a life implodes. Mark followed her, still shirtless, still trying to talk about this like adults. Anna zipped the bag, walked to the door, and left her key on the small table in the entryway. She walked out of the apartment, down the stairs, and into the parking lot without looking back, the foundations of her life crumbling into dust behind her. Anna drove for 3 hours, the duffel bag a heavy, accusing lump on the passenger seat. She had no destination. The city lights of Chicago blurred into streaks of neon and white, a watercolor painting left out in the rain. Her mind was mercifully, terrifyingly blank. The shock was a physical anesthetic, numbing her to the reality of what she had seen. There was no room for rage or grief. There was only the hum of the engine and the rhythmic thwack-thwack of the windshield wipers, fighting a light drizzle. Finally, parked in the fluorescent glare of a 24-hour gas station, she called her cousin Emma. Her voice was steady when she asked if she could stay for a few days, citing a big fight with Mark. Emma, kind and unsuspecting, agreed immediately. For 5 days, Anna lived in a state of suspended animation. She slept on Emma's couch, a floral-patterned antique that smelled of dust and old memories. She woke up before Emma and her husband, David, left for work. She showered, dressed in one of the 3 work outfits she had packed, and drove to Brennan and Associates. It was an act of pure, desperate denial. If she kept going to work, if she kept checking items off her to-do list, then the scene in her bedroom couldn't be real. Her life couldn't be over. Her colleagues were kind, in that pitying, awkward way people are when they sense a domestic crisis. They gave her space, didn't ask why her eyes were red-rimmed, and offered to get her coffee. Anna just nodded, stared at her monitor, and tried to make sense of spreadsheets that now looked like a foreign language. On Monday morning, her boss, Marcus, asked her to come to his office. He had that careful, HR-mandated expression of sympathy that immediately signaled determination. "Anna," he began, gesturing to the chair. He didn't meet her eyes. "We're making some changes in the department. Restructuring. And unfortunately, your position is being eliminated. Anna stared at him. Restructuring? We just signed 3 new clients. My quarterly review was excellent. I know, Anna. This isn't about performance. It's a budgetary decision and it's final. He slid a folder across the desk. A severance package. 2 months' pay. And in that cold, sterile moment, another piece clicked into place. Marcus wasn't just her boss. He was Mark's college friend. It was a fact she had known for years, but had filed away as simple networking. Now, it felt like a linchpin. The timing wasn't a coincidence. It was a coordination. I see, she said. The numbness was a blessing, a shield. Was I fired, Marcus? Or was I removed? He finally looked at her, his gaze faltering. The decision is final, Anna. I'll have security escort you. She was walked out of the building, carrying a small cardboard box of her personal effects. She had lost her marriage, her best friend, and her job in less than a week. The collapse was accelerating. The divorce papers arrived 2 days later, delivered by a process server to Emma's doorstep. Emma's husband, David, signed for them, his expression a mixture of pity and growing impatience. The legal language was brutal and swift. Mark was filing for divorce on grounds of irreconcilable differences, and he was being represented by Elizabeth Hartley, a legal shark known for dismantling opponents in court. Anna found a court-appointed lawyer, a tired man named Gerald who seemed to be managing an impossible caseload. He reviewed the filing and sighed. He's not asking for a division of assets, Miss Garrett. He's asking for everything. The court date was a humiliation. Anna sat at the defendant's table in her only suit, feeling small and utterly transparent. Mark was on the other side, looking polished and aggrieved. But the real performance came from Chloe. Chloe took the stand, dressed in a conservative navy blue suit, her eyes filled with crocodile tears. She testified that she had been deeply worried about Anna for months. She painted a picture of a woman who was paranoid, emotionally volatile, and prone to fits of irrational jealousy. She claimed Anna's behavior had driven Mark away, and that she and Mark had only found comfort in each other after Anna's instability had destroyed the marriage. She accused me of awful things, Chloe whispered, dabbing her eye. She became obsessed with the idea that everyone was conspiring against her. It was terrifying to watch. It was a masterpiece of character assassination. Anna's lawyer, Gerald, tried to object, to paint Chloe as a biased witness, but Mark's lawyer shut him down. Is it not true, Miss Garrett? Hartley boomed, turning to Anna, that you were just fired from your job for performance-related issues? No, Anna said, her voice shaking. It was restructuring. Or was it? Hartley pressed, that your erratic behavior and instability had become a liability to your employer? The judge, Robert Cunningham, was a cold, imposing man who seemed to have made his decision before Anna even sat down. He listened to Chloe's testimony with a sympathetic nod. He looked at Anna's unemployment status with disdain. The ruling was a formality. Citing Anna's demonstrated emotional instability and her lack of current income, Judge Cunningham awarded the apartment and all its contents to Mark. He was also granted the car and the majority of their shared savings, as he was the primary earner, and Anna was deemed to have contributed to the dissolution. Anna was left with her clothing, her laptop, and the severance check that was already dwindling. The gavel fell like a final nail in the coffin of her old life. The collapse was now complete. Emma's sympathy had reached its limit, strained by David's pointed comments about Anna needing to get on her own feet and bringing drama into their home. Anna could feel the air thicken with her presence. She spent 2 nights on the couch of a former colleague, Diane, who then suddenly remembered her sister was coming to visit. She was out of options. She was toxic, a pariah. Everyone connected to her old life was either gone or had locked their doors. With the last of her severance money, she found the cheapest place that wouldn't ask for a credit check. The Summit View Motel. It sat on the industrial edge of the city, a place of stained carpets, flickering neon, and residents who never made eye contact. The woman at the front desk slid a key attached to a plastic tag across the counter. Room 114, the woman said, not looking up from her magazine. Weekly rates due every Friday. No visitors after 10. Anna walked into the small room. It smelled of stale cigarettes, bleach, and desperation. She dropped her duffel bag on the thin, questionable bedspread. She had $214 left to her name. She had no husband, no friend, no home, and no job. She had been erased. As she stared at the water-stained ceiling, a terrifyingly lucid thought cut through the numbness. Chloe was right. They are all conspiring against me. This was an execution. The first week at the Summit View Motel was a lesson in survival. Anna's life shrank to the four walls of room 114. The daily rate was a predator, devouring her dwindling funds with relentless precision. She lived on instant noodles and stale coffee from the lobby, the acrid taste of both a constant reminder of her descent. She spent her days in a fog, cycling between numb disbelief and sharp, stabbing panic. She applied for jobs online from the motel's spotty Wi-Fi, sending resumes into a digital void, but her confidence was shattered. How could she sell herself as a competent professional when she was living in a room that smelled of mildew and failure? Her world was a soundtrack of muffled arguments from the next room, the rumble of trucks on the nearby interstate, and the incessant hum of the room's ancient air conditioning unit. She was utterly, profoundly alone. This, she realized, was rock bottom. It wasn't a dramatic fall. It was a slow, grinding dissolution. She was a ghost haunting her own life. On the 8th day, a Tuesday, the same day of the week her life had fractured, she woke with a grim, hollow feeling. She couldn't spend another day marinating in her own misery, staring at the peeling paint on the ceiling. She had to do something, even if it was pointless. She would clean. She started with the trash, gathering the empty noodle cups and paper coffee cups. She wiped down the sticky laminate surfaces with a damp, threadbare towel. It was a futile gesture of control in a life that was completely out of her hands. Finally, she knelt to retrieve a wrapper that had blown under the bed. As she reached into the dusty darkness beneath the box spring, her fingers brushed against something solid and textured. Not a piece of trash. It was large, firm-sided, and covered in what felt like leather. Her heart gave a strange, painful lurch. She lay on the floor, her cheek pressed against the rough, stained carpet, and pulled the object into the weak morning light. It was a suitcase, an old, deep brown leather valise, the kind from a bygone era, with brass corners and heavy-duty latches. It was completely out of place in this disposable, transient world. Tugging it free, she saw a faded leather luggage tag attached to the handle by a string. On it, written in a precise, familiar, and utterly shocking script, was her full name, Anna Marie Garrett. She sat back on her heels, her breath catching in her throat. She knew that handwriting. It belonged to her Aunt Clara. Aunt Clara, her mother's older sister, had been the family eccentric, the one they all spoke of with a mixture of affection and exasperation. Clara lived in a small, cluttered house in Colorado, surrounded by books and filing cabinets, convinced of corporate conspiracies and government cover-ups. She had been the paranoid aunt, the one who handed out pamphlets at Thanksgiving and warned Anna to never trust a man with a perfect smile. Clara had died 9 months ago, alone in that house. Anna had felt a deep, lingering guilt for not visiting more, for dismissing her as crazy, just like everyone else. How was her suitcase, with Anna's name on it, under this specific bed in this specific motel room? The logistics of it were impossible. Yet here it was. Her fingers, trembling, explored the suitcase. The latches were locked. She turned it over, and on the bottom, she found a small key, held fast by a brittle piece of yellowing tape. It was so typically Clara, hiding the solution in plain sight. She peeled the key free, inserted it into the first lock, and turned. The click was loud in the silent room. She did the same with the second. She paused, her hand hovering over the lid. This felt like opening a tomb. She lifted the lid. The case exhaled the scent of mothballs and old paper. Inside, neatly bundled with rubber bands, was cash. Stacks and stacks of cash. Hundreds, 50s and 20s. Anna's hands shook so violently she could barely touch it. She pulled out the first bundle. She fanned it. It was real. She pulled out the rest, piling them on the faded bedspread. She didn't count it precisely, but she knew, instinctively, that it was a life-altering amount of money. Beneath the cash lay 2 items. The first was a single plane ticket, one way, from Chicago O'Hare to Denver, Colorado. The flight was for this Friday, 3 days from now. The second was a single sheet of yellow legal paper, folded twice. She unfolded it. It was a handwritten note, in Clara's unmistakable, sharp script. Anna, if you are reading this, it means you are in the exact place I feared you would be. Do not panic. Listen to me. The money in this case is $70,000. It is your travel money. Your destruction was not random. It was planned. Mark and Chloe were not accidents in your life. They were assignments. They are connected to Astronova Pharmaceuticals. They are connected to your mother. Eleanor's death 6 years ago was not an accident. She was murdered. She found out what they were doing, and they silenced her. I have spent every day since she died proving it. Do not trust anyone from your old life. Go to the airport. Use the ticket. The address on the back of this paper is my house. Go there. Go to the shed out back. The real fortune is waiting for you. The truth is waiting for you. You are your mother's daughter, Anna. Be brave. Burn them all down. Clara. Anna read the note once, then a second time, then a third. The room, which had felt like a coffin, suddenly expanded. The hum of the AIC faded, replaced by a roaring in her ears. It was planned. They were assignments. Your mother was murdered. Chloe's words in the courtroom echoed in her mind. Obsessed with the idea that everyone was conspiring against her. It wasn't a lie to make Anna look unstable. It was a taunt. It was the truth, weaponized as ridicule. Aunt Clara, the paranoid aunt. She hadn't been paranoid at all. She had been the only one telling the truth. While Anna was building her stable, predictable life, Clara had been building an arsenal. The $70,000 on the bed was not a gift. It was ammunition. The note was not a comfort. It was a summons. Anna looked at her reflection in the cheap mirror above the dresser. The hollow, defeated woman who had stared back at her that morning was gone. In her place was someone else, someone with cold eyes and a terrifying, sharp clarity. The numbness of the past week wasn't despair, it was a chrysalis. And what was emerging was pure, unadulterated rage. She carefully stacked the money and placed it back in the suitcase. She put the note and the ticket in her purse. She was no longer a victim hiding in a motel. She was the executor of her aunt's final, furious will. She was going to Denver. The next 3 days were a blur of adrenaline and stealth. Anna paid for her motel room in cash, one day at a time, speaking to no one. She left only once to buy a cheap, disposable burner phone from a convenience store. The $70,000 lived in the leather suitcase, which she kept either locked in her room or, when she slept, wedged under her pillow, her hand resting on the handle. The rage that had crystallized in her chest had cooled into a sharp, diamond-hard focus. She was no longer a victim. She was a variable, and she would not be predicted. On Friday morning, long before the sun rose over the gritty Chicago skyline, she checked out of the Summit View Motel. She left the key in the room and walked out into the pre-dawn chill. She used her new burner phone to call a rideshare, taking it not to O'Hare, but to a train station. From there, she took a different car service to the airport. It was the kind of rudimentary counter-surveillance she'd seen in movies, but Clara's note, they were assignments, had rewired her brain. She had to assume she was being watched, that her digital footprint was a map leading straight to her. She paid for everything in cash. The flight was blessedly anonymous, a middle seat on a crowded budget airline. Anna kept her head down, a baseball cap pulled low over her eyes, the heavy suitcase clutched between her feet for the entire 3-hour flight. She didn't sleep. She didn't read. She stared at the seat back in front of her, her mind replaying the last 6 years, hunting for the seams. She had been a fool, a happy, trusting fool. Every fight she and Mark had, every reconciliation, every shared laugh, was it all a performance? Had he been reporting back to someone? When he held her, she cried over her mother's death. Was he gathering intelligence on her grief? The thought made her physically ill. And Chloe, her best friend, the Thursday night wine sessions, the shared secrets, the advice to just be patient with Mark, it was all surveillance. They hadn't just betrayed her, they had curated her. Denver greeted her with a sky so vast and blue it felt like an accusation. The air was thin and cold, a stark contrast to the humid, heavy air of Chicago. It smelled of pine and elevation. She rented a nondescript sedan from an off-brand rental agency, again paying in cash. The agent, A young man with a bored expression barely looked at her. To him, she was just another transient face. She was, for the first time in her life, invisible. And for the first time in her life, she was grateful for it. The address on the back of Clara's note was in a suburb nestled in the foothills, a quiet, older neighborhood where the houses were set far back from the road, hidden by mature pine and aspen trees. She drove the rental car up the winding, cracked asphalt driveway of her aunt's house and parked. The place was exactly as she remembered from her last visit, nearly a decade ago. It was a small, 1970s-era ranch, clad in dark with siding that was starting to warp. The lawn was a wild, overgrown meadow of weeds and tall grass, a testament to the 9 months the house had sat empty. A few dead newspapers lay yellowing on the porch. It looked abandoned, forgotten. The perfect place to hide a secret. She used the key Clara had taped inside the suitcase, a key marked house, and let herself in. The air inside was stale and cold, the silence absolute. But where the outside was neglected, the inside was a monument to a singular, obsessive mind. Every wall was lined with bookshelves, and every shelf was overflowing. Books were stacked on tables, piled in corners, and lined up along the baseboards. And where there weren't books, there were filing cabinets. Dozens of them. Gray metal, industrial-grade filing cabinets, each drawer meticulously labeled in Clara's sharp script. They filled the living room where a couch should have been. They lined the hallway. The house wasn't a home, it was an archive. Anna stood in the entryway, her suitcase in hand, and felt a profound wave of guilt and awe. While the family had been pitying Clara, calling her paranoid and strange, she had been working. She followed the note's instructions, go to the shed out back. She walked through the cluttered kitchen, where a single coffee mug sat unwashed in the sink, and out the back door. The backyard was even more overgrown than the front. In the far corner, half hidden by a tangle of wild raspberry bushes, sat a simple windowless shed. It was unremarkable, just like the house, except for one detail. The lock. While the house door had a simple, old-fashioned deadbolt, the shed was secured with a massive, industrial-grade padlock and a heavy-duty steel hasp, the kind you'd see on a high-security storage unit. The hardware was brand new, gleaming against the shed's peeling paint. Anna retrieved the third key from her suitcase, the one marked shed. It slid into the heavy lock and turned with a smooth, oiled click. She pulled the lock free, her heart pounding a heavy, metallic rhythm against her ribs. She slid the heavy bar of the hasp aside and pulled the door open. The inside was, impossibly, even more organized than the house. More filing cabinets lined one wall. Boxes, stacked neatly to the ceiling, lined the other, each one indexed with a reference code. It was the office of a professional archivist. But the note had said the real fortune. This was just paper. Then she saw it. In the back corner, partially hidden under a heavy tarp and a few decoy paint cans, was a square outline on the floor. A trapdoor. She moved the cans, their weight surprising her. They were full. Another classic Clara touch, a booby trap of inconvenience. She pulled back the heavy tarp, revealing a metal ring handle set flush into the wooden floor. Next to it was another high-security lock, this one set directly into the floor. She used the fourth and final key. It turned. She pulled the ring handle. The door was heavy, insulated, but it lifted on well-oiled hinges, revealing a steep wooden ladder descending into perfect, cold darkness. Anna pulled the burner phone from her pocket and turned on its flashlight. The weak beam cut into the black. She hesitated for only a second. She had come as far. She was not going to be stopped by the dark. She slung her purse over her shoulder, gripped the ladder rungs, and climbed down. The air grew colder, drier. After about 10 feet, her shoes hit a solid concrete floor. She shone the flashlight beam around. She was in a small, concrete-walled room. As her eyes adjusted, she saw a light switch on the wall. She flipped it. A series of battery-powered LED strips flickered on, humming faintly as they illuminated the space. Anna gasped. This was no crawl space. It was a bunker. The room was perhaps 15 feet square and 7 feet high, the walls sealed and insulated. A dehumidifier hummed quietly in the corner, keeping the air crisp and dry. And in this small, climate-controlled space was the heart of her aunt's obsession. More filing cabinets, more index boxes, and in the center, a simple wooden table holding a laptop computer, an old cassette player, and a stack of photographs. This was it. This was the archive. This was the truth. Anna walked to the table, her hand shaking as she reached for the first photograph on the top of the stack. Anna's hand trembled as she picked up the first photograph. It was a glossy 5x7 print, a candid shot from some kind of corporate event. A banner in the background, slightly out of focus, read, Astronova Pharmaceuticals Annual Research Summit. And standing in the center of the photo, smiling, were three people. Her mother, Eleanor, looking vibrant and professional, holding a plastic cup of wine. To her right, with his arm draped casually over her shoulder, was Mark. To her left, leaning in with a familiar, conspiratorial smile, was Chloe. All three wore lanyards with name tags. All three looked comfortable, familiar, like old friends. Anna's mind refused to process the image. She turned it over, as if the back might offer an explanation. On the white paper, in Clara's meticulous script, was a date. It was from 8.5 years ago. 2 full years before Anna had met Mark at that dinner party. 1 year before she had even graduated from college. Her entire relationship, her entire marriage, wasn't just a lie, it was an infiltration. The mutual friends who threw that party, the chance meeting, the charming courtship, it was all a script. A long, patient, 7-year operation. She had been targeted, selected, and managed. Mark hadn't just cheated on her. He had never been hers in the first place. She felt the air leave her lungs, a cold, sharp vacuum. She leaned against the table, her knees weak, and picked up the next photo. It was a surveillance shot, grainy and time-stamped. Mark and Chloe, sitting in a parked car, 2 blocks from Anna's apartment. They weren't kissing. They were talking, looking serious, like 2 colleagues exchanging reports. The date was from 3 years ago, long before the cracks in her marriage had even begun to show. They weren't just lovers. They were partners. She set the photos down, her hands numb. Her gaze fell on the cassette player. It was an old, portable model from the 1980s, the kind Clara had always used, claiming they were unhackable. Next to it was a small, plastic box of cassette tapes, each labeled in the same precise hand. The first tape on the stack was labeled Mark G. and Richard Price. March 2019. Eleanor V. Status. Richard Price. Anna knew that name. He was the CEO of Astronova. The visionary, the billionaire, the man whose face was on the cover of business magazines. March 2019. That was 2 months before her mother's death. With a dreadful, mechanical slowness, Anna picked up the tape. It felt heavy, cold. She clicked open the cassette player's door, slid the tape in, and pressed the play button. The click of the button was followed by the whir of the motor and a burst of static. Then a voice. A voice she had heard every day for 7 years. The voice that had whispered, "I love you," in the dark, that had calmed her when she was anxious, that had promised her forever. It was Mark. "She's getting too close, Richard," Mark's voice said, clear and cold. All the warmth Anna had known was gone. This was the voice of a stranger. "She's made copies of the trial data, the internal audits. She's been meeting with someone. I don't know who yet, but I'm working on it through Anna." A second voice, older and laced with authority, replied. It was unmistakably Richard Price. "We can't let this go public. The approval for Saracor is worth billions. If she exposes the data manipulation, we're not just facing fines. We're facing criminal charges. Can you contain her? Can you get the data back through the daughter?" "I've tried," Mark said. The frustration in his voice was chilling. "Eleanor doesn't discuss specifics with Anna. She's protective, thinks she's keeping her safe by walling her off. It's making my job harder. Anna doesn't know anything useful." There was a long, heavy pause. Anna held her breath, her hand clamped over her mouth. "Then we need to move to the final contingency," Richard Price said, his voice flat, emotionless. "We can't risk the entire company because one sentimental accountant grew a conscience. It's time to solve the Eleanor problem. Permanently." Anna felt a scream build in her throat, but it died as she heard Mark's reply. He didn't object. He didn't sound horrified. He sounded logistical. "What about the blowback?" Mark asked. "If Eleanor dies, Anna's going to be a wreck. She'll lean on me, which gives me more control. But there's the aunt, Clara. She's already suspicious of everything. She'll start digging. Let her dig, Price scoffed. Nobody takes Clara seriously. She's a family lunatic. As long as the event is clean, she'll just be another crank shouting into the wind. We have people for this. Car accidents happen every day, especially on that highway. Make it look tragic. Make it look fast. The recording continued for another 10 minutes, discussing logistics, timing, and how to manage Anna's grief afterward. They were planning her mother's murder. They were planning it like a product launch, a simple, cold, corporate decision. And the man she had loved, the man she had married, was a willing, active participant. He hadn't just let her mother die. He had helped plan the execution. Anna snapped the stop button, so hard the plastic groaned. She ripped the tape from the player and threw it across the room, where it clattered against the concrete wall. The silence that rushed in was deafening, filled with the ghosts of the last 6 years. Her mother's funeral. The way Mark had held her, his expression a perfect mask of sorrow. The way he had helped her sort through Eleanor's things, probably searching for the very data she had died to protect. The way he and Chloe had steered her away from Aunt Clara, encouraging the family narrative that Clara's conspiracy theories were just her own grief manifesting as madness. It was all a lie. A monstrous, suffocating, intricate lie. She sank to the concrete floor, her back against a metal filing cabinet, and finally, for the first time since she'd walked in on Mark and Chloe, Anna wept. It was not a cry of grief or sadness. It was a raw, guttural howl of rage, a sound of something breaking inside her, shedding the last vestiges of the naive woman who had lived in Chicago. She cried for her mother. She cried for her aunt, who had borne this terrible knowledge alone. And she cried for the years of her life that had been stolen, used as a weapon against her own family. She didn't know how long she sat there, in the cold, artificial light of the bunker. Minutes or hours. Eventually, the sobs subsided, leaving behind a cold, desolate clarity. She knew what they had done. Now, she had to find out why. She got to her feet, her legs unsteady, and wiped her face with the sleeve of her shirt. She looked at the table. The tapes were the how. The filing cabinets, filled with Astronova's internal documents, were the why. And the laptop, sitting dark and silent in the center of the table, was the what next. A yellow sticky note was affixed to the lid. On it, in Clara's hand, was a single urgent instruction. Play this first, Anna. Before you do anything else. The laptop was an older, heavy model, but it whirred to life obediently when she pressed the power button. The desktop was clean, almost empty, save for a single video file in the center of the screen, for Anna.mp4. She double-clicked it. The screen flickered, and a video player opened. A face filled the frame, and Anna's breath hitched. It was Aunt Clara, but it was not the Aunt Clara she remembered. The woman on the screen was a ghost of the vibrant, eccentric aunt who had argued passionately about politics at Thanksgiving. This Clara was frail, her skin paper-thin and pale, her eyes sunken but burning with a familiar, undimmed intensity. She was propped up in bed by pillows, wearing a simple navy blue cardigan that Anna recognized. She was clearly in the last stages of her illness, recording this message as her final act. "Hello, Anna." Clara's voice was thin, reedy, but steady. "If you're watching this, well, it means I'm gone. And it means you found my breadcrumbs. I'm so sorry, child. I'm so sorry you had to find them at all." She paused, taking a slow, rattling breath. Anna watched, her hand pressed to the cold screen, tears welling in her eyes. "You think I was paranoid," Clara stated. It wasn't a question. "I know. The whole family did. Crazy Aunt Clara. I don't blame you. It was safer for you to believe that. I tried to warn you, you know. At your engagement party. I pulled you aside and told you to be careful, that something about Mark's smile didn't reach his eyes. You told me I was being cynical, that I was trying to ruin your happiness. You were so bright, so in love. I couldn't break your heart with a truth you weren't ready to hear. So I let you think I was crazy." A flicker of the old, wry humor flashed in her eyes. "Truth is, Anna, being the family lunatic was the best cover I ever had. No one pays attention to the crazy old lady in the corner. No one suspects she's the one listening, the one connecting the dots, the one spending her retirement funding private investigators. Clara leaned a little closer to the camera, a cough shaking her thin frame. Your mother! Eleanor, she wasn't just my sister, Anna. She was my best friend. And she was brilliant. When she found the discrepancies at Astronova, the falsified data on their new blockbuster drug, she didn't know what to do. But she knew who to come to. She came to me because she knew I would believe her. We were building this case together, in this very room, for months. We were going to go to the federal authorities. Then the accident. Clara's gaze dropped, the first sign of her composure breaking. It wasn't an accident, Anna. I knew at the moment I got the call. They were too fast to clean it up. Too neat. So I've spent the last 6 years of my life finishing what your mother started. Everything is here. Every financial trace. Every internal memo she smuggled out. Every recording my investigators managed to get. It's all here. She looked directly into the camera, her eyes locking onto Anna's. The intensity was so real. Anna felt as if her aunt was in the bunker with her. Now you have a choice. The $70,000 I left for you. Yes, I had a contact at that motel. An old PI who owed me a favor. He made sure the room and the suitcase were waiting for you. That money is enough for you to disappear. Take it, Anna. Please. Change your name. Go to Belize, buy a little house on the beach. Live along. Safe, happy life. You've already lost so much. Your mother would want you to be safe. I want you to be safe. Anna shook her head, whispering no to the screen. Clara held up a frail hand, as if she'd heard her. Or, she said, her voice dropping, there is the other choice. You can use what is in this room. You can take this evidence, and you can burn them all to the ground. You can get justice for your mother. But I have to warn you, child. This is not a game. Richard Price and Astronova are not just executives. They are criminals, protected by billions of dollars and armies of lawyers. They will not hesitate to crush you. They will try to destroy you, just as they did Eleanor. And you will be in very real danger. A long, agonizing pause. Clara seemed to be gathering her last bit of strength. But I didn't leave you to fight an army with a pea shooter. A small, wry smile touched Clara's lips. The $70,000 is just travel money, Anna. Your mother was smart. She saw them coming. In the weeks before she died, she quietly liquidated her own investments, her stock options, everything. She put it all into a blind trust, one so deep and so dark they'd never find it. She made me the executor, with one instruction, to give it to you only when you were free of Mark and ready to see the truth. Clara's hand fumbled for a piece of paper on her bedside table. She held it up to the camera. Mountain Pacific Credit Union, she read, her voice shaking with effort. Account number 7743-88. The password is your mother's old employee ID number. You remember it. You used to make fun of it. Anna's mind flashed back. A sudden, bright memory. Her mother, pinning her badge on. Why is it so weird, Mom? It's my number, honey. 881 Tango. 881 Tango, Anna whispered, her fingers tracing the numbers on the screen. There is $14 million in that account, Anna, Clara said, her voice barely a whisper now. It's your inheritance. It's your war chest. Run with it, or fight with it. The choice is yours. But whatever you do, live. And for Eleanor, for me, don't you dare let those bastards win. Clara's hand reached out, as if to touch Anna's face through the screen. Her eyes were bright with tears. I love you, Anna. Be brave. Her hand fell to the side, and she reached over, the screen going black. Anna sat in the total silence of the bunker. The buzzing of the dehumidifier was the only sound in the world. $14 million. A war chest. A legacy of truth. The choice Clara had given her was no choice at all. You don't get handed a sword, a shield, and a map to the dragon's lair and then decide to go to Belize. She picked up her burner phone, her hands perfectly steady. She opened the web browser and typed, Mountain Pacific Credit Union. She found the number, but she wouldn't call them. Not yet. She scrolled through the contacts list on her phone, which was empty save for the car service she'd used. She went back to Clara's desk. Tucked beside the laptop was a worn, leather-bound address book. She flipped through the pages, past old family friends and local repairmen, until she reached the J section. There it was. A single entry. Jenkins, Sarah, FBI, Denver Field Office. Below it was a direct cell phone number. Aunt Clara, it seemed, had already set the first meeting. Anna picked up her phone and dialed the number. The phone rang 4 times, each electronic brrring echoing painfully in the small concrete room. Anna was about to hang up, her nerve faltering, when a sharp, impatient voice answered. "Jenkins, my name is Anna Garrett," Anna said, her voice steadier than she felt. "My aunt was Clara Vaughn. She left me some information. Information I think you need. It's about Astronova Pharmaceuticals." The silence on the other end was heavy, absolute. For a moment, Anna thought the agent had hung up. When Jenkins finally spoke, her tone had shifted from impatience to a wary, professional monotone. "Clara Vaughn. Yes, I knew your aunt. She contacted our office frequently." The subtext was clear. Clara was the crazy lady who called us every week. "She wasn't crazy," Anna said, her voice flat, cold. "She was right. I have her work. I have the archive. I have evidence related to Project Saracor. And I have a recording of Richard Price planning the murder of my mother, Eleanor Vaughn." Another beat of silence, this one charged with a different kind of energy. Project Saracor. That was the name she had seen on a dozen of Clara's file labels. It was a gamble, a keyword. "Where are you right now, Miss Garrett?" Jenkins's voice was sharp, all pretense of boredom gone. "I'm at her house. In the bunker." "The what?" "You need to come here. Now. And you need to come alone," Anna said. "I don't go to unsecure locations based on a phone call. We'll meet. Public place. 1 hour. The Copper Spoon Diner on Colfax. I'll be in a booth, reading a paper. If I see anyone with you, or if you're so much as 5 minutes late, I'm gone." "Understood." "Understood," Anna said, and the line went dead. Anna moved quickly. She had to verify Clara's final gift. She sat at the laptop, pulled up the Mountain Pacific Credit Union website, and called the number. She navigated the automated menus until she reached a human being. "I need to check the balance on a trust account," she said, giving the number Clara had left. "Of course. For security, I'll need the account's password," the representative said. 881 Tango, Anna said. The sound of typing. A long pause. The representative's voice returned, suddenly several degrees more respectful. "Thank you, Miss Garrett. 1 moment while I transfer you to our wealth management division. Please hold." The hold music was a tinny classical piece. A new voice, smooth and professional, came on the line. "Miss Garrett, this is Patricia Dunn with Wealth Management. I've been instructed by the accounts executor, Miss Clara Vaughn, to expect your call. The Eleanor Vaughn Trust is fully active and at your disposal. The current liquid assets, as of this morning, are $14,218,450.31. How can I assist you today?" Anna's knees buckled. It was real. I just needed to confirm. "Thank you. I will be in touch soon." She hung up, her mind reeling. A war chest. She was no longer a penniless refugee. She was funded. She locked the bunker, reset the shed, and walked out of the house, leaving the old leather suitcase, still heavy with $70,000 in cash, sitting in the front hall. It felt like pocket change now. The Copper Spoon Diner was a relic, all chrome and cracked vinyl. Anna slid into the booth opposite a woman in her late 40s with tired, intelligent eyes and dark hair pulled back in a severe bun. She wore practical jeans and a blazer, and she didn't lower the newspaper she was reading. "You're on time." "Good," Agent Jenkins said from behind the paper. "What do you have?" Anna didn't waste time. She reached into her purse, pulled out a single photograph, and slid it across the table. It was the photo. Mark, Chloe, and Eleanor. Jenkins finally lowered the paper. She glanced at the photo, her expression unreadable. "And that's my mother, Eleanor Vaughn. That's my husband, Mark Garrett. And that's my best friend, Chloe Reed. The photo was taken 2 years before I ever met Mark. His entire relationship with me was a lie so he could get to my mother. He and Chloe were his handlers." Jenkins studied the photo. Then she looked up, her eyes boring into Anna's. She was looking for the cracks. She was looking for the crazy she'd heard in Clara's voice. She found none. She found only cold, focused rage. "You mentioned a recording," Jenkins said, her voice low. It's in the bunker, Anna replied, along with 6 years of internal memos, financial records, and surveillance reports. My aunt didn't just have a theory, Agent Jenkins. She built your entire case. Are you going to see it? Or are you going to let me walk out of here and find someone who will? Jenkins's lips thinned into a grim line. She folded her newspaper, dropped a $5 bill on the table for her coffee, and stood up. Follow me. My car. You're not driving to your aunt's house in a rental. If you're right about this, that car is already compromised. The drive back to the house was silent. Jenkins drove with an efficient, focused aggression, her eyes constantly checking her mirrors. When they arrived, Anna led her straight through the house to the backyard shed. Jenkins paused at the door, her eyes taking in the high-security locks. Your aunt was thorough, Jenkins murmured. You have no idea, Anna said. She unlocked the shed, unlocked the trapdoor, and flipped on the lights to the bunker. Jenkins stopped at the bottom of the ladder, her professional composure finally shattering. She stood in the center of the room and did a slow 360-degree turn, her mouth slightly open. Her gaze swept over the filing cabinets, the labeled boxes, the table. It wasn't the rambling, chaotic mess of a conspiracy theorist. It was a meticulously organized, cross-referenced, climate-controlled vault of evidence. My God, Jenkins whispered, her voice filled with a kind of holy awe. She walked to the wall of filing cabinets and pulled open a drawer at random. It was labeled ASTRA, Saracor, falsified trial data raw. She pulled out a file, her gloved hands, when had she put on gloves, leafing through the pages. We've been trying to get this for years, she said, her voice shaking with adrenaline. We knew they were cooking the books, but we could never find the original data. How? My mother smuggled it out. My aunt spent 6 years organizing it, Anna said. She walked to the cassette player and held up the tape. And this is Richard Price giving the order to have her killed. Agent Jenkins looked at the tape, then at the wall of files, then at Anna. The last trace of skepticism was gone, replaced by the hard, predatory look of a hunter who had just been handed her prey, gift-wrapped. Miss Garrett, Jenkins said, her voice low and electric. Your aunt wasn't just a crank. She was the best investigator I've ever seen. You're not in danger. They are. She pulled out her phone. I'm calling this in. We're securing this location. This isn't just a case anymore. This is a federal takedown. The alliance was forged. The war had begun. The bunker did not remain a secret sanctuary for long. The moment Agent Jenkins made her call, the quiet cul-de-sac of Clara's neighborhood was transformed. Within 2 hours, a fleet of unmarked black government vehicles descended, not with sirens, but with a quiet, terrifying efficiency. Men and women in dark suits, analysts and forensic specialists from the FBI's white-collar and violent crime divisions began the painstaking process of cataloging, bagging, and removing every file, every tape, and every piece of paper from the bunker. Anna, standing on the overgrown lawn, felt a strange sense of dispossession. The archive, her aunt's life's work, was no longer hers. It now belonged to the U.S. government. You can't stay here, Jenkins told her, her voice low and urgent. The house is compromised, and as of this moment, you are the single most valuable and most vulnerable witness in a multi-billion-dollar federal investigation. As far as the world is concerned, Anna Garrett ceased to exist when she left that motel in Chicago. Anna's new life was a one-bedroom apartment in a sterile, modern high-rise in downtown Denver. It was anonymous, leased under a corporate LLC controlled by the U.S. Marshal Service. It had brand-new, uncomfortable furniture, a fully stocked kitchen she never used, and a view of the city that made her feel like she was in a fishbowl, even as Jenkins assured her it was the most secure location they had. The $14 million sat in the Mountain Pacific account, untouched. She was, simultaneously, a multimillionaire and a penniless refugee living on a government stipend in a borrowed life. The days blurred into a grueling, monotonous routine. This was the weight of justice, and Anna learned quickly that it was not a swift, avenging sword. It was a mountain of paperwork, moved one agonizing inch at a time by teams of lawyers. Her days were spent in a windowless conference room in the federal building. On one side of the long table sat Anna. On the other sat the team, Agent Jenkins, two financial analysts who spoke in a rapid-fire language of shell corporations and wire transfers, and the lead prosecutor, Assistant U.S. Attorney Marcus Cole. Cole was a sharp, precise man who wore perfectly pressed suits and never smiled. He was not her friend. He was not her therapist. His client was the United States, and Anna was his primary asset. "Let's go over it again," he would say, his voice devoid of sympathy. "The dinner party. Tell me who was there. Their names. What they did for a living. Who introduced you to Mark Garrett." Anna recounted her life, piece by piece, under the flat fluorescent lights. She narrated her entire 7-year marriage, turning memories that were once precious into data points for a criminal case. She detailed her friendship with Chloe, every shared confidence, every Thursday night wine session, now recontextualized as a surveillance debrief. The psychological toll was immense. She had to relive every betrayal, not with the heat of fresh anger, but with the cold, detached precision of an autopsy. The worst day was when they played the tape. "We need to authenticate your husband's voice and Richard Price's," Cole said, placing the cassette player on the table. Anna had to sit there, her hands folded in her lap, and listen to the man she had loved calmly discuss ending her mother's life. The analysts recorded her verbal confirmation, their faces impassive. "Yes," Anna said, her voice a dead, hollow thing. "That is my husband, Mark Garrett. And the other, that is Richard Price. I recognize his voice from company keynotes." Cole clicked stop. "Good. Now let's move on to the financial statements your mother smuggled out." He was already on the next item, but Anna was still in that room, the sound of Mark's voice, "What about the blowback?" echoing in her skull. She would go back to the safe house at night, the silence of the apartment deafening, and stare at the city lights, feeling the ghosts of her old life pressing in. She was no longer a person. She was a living archive, a breathing piece of evidence. The tension in the federal building was palpable. Astronova, the beast they were poking, had begun to stir. "Their lawyers are good," Jenkins told her during a coffee break, her voice tight. "They filed a dozen motions to quash our initial subpoenas. They know we're digging, even if they don't know what we have. They're already building a counter-narrative." "What narrative?" Anna asked. Jenkins gave her a hard look. "You. The official story, leaked to their friendly press, is that the unstable ex-wife of a former consultant is harassing the company, bitter over a nasty divorce. They are using the exact lies Mark and Chloe built to discredit you." "The divorce," Anna whispered. "The judge. Cunningham. He was part of it." "We're pulling his financials now," Jenkins said. "If Clara was right about him, too, that's the link. That's what connects your personal destruction to the corporate conspiracy. We just need to find it." The breakthrough came 3 weeks later. One of the financial analysts, a young woman who rarely spoke, let out a low whistle. "Got him," she said. All eyes turned to her. She projected her screen onto the wall. "Judge Robert Cunningham. He purchased a vacation home in Telluride 3 years ago. Price tag, $2.8 million. Far more than his salary." "Shell Corporation?" Cole asked, leaning forward. "3 of them," the analyst said, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "But the final payment, a transfer for $1.5 million, didn't come from his accounts. It came from a consulting firm that doesn't exist. And that firm," she clicked again, "is funded by an offshore account that receives 90% of its capital from Astronova Pharmaceuticals, Political Action Fund. The room was silent. Cole stood up and slowly buttoned his suit jacket. He looked at Anna, and for the first time, she saw something other than professional detachment in his eyes. It was respect. "They didn't just murder your mother, Miss Garrett," he said, his voice cold with a prosecutor's righteous anger. "They corrupted the very system meant to protect you. They built a cage of lies, and we just found the key." He turned to Jenkins. "It's time. Get the warrants. Get all of them. I want Richard Price. I want Mark Garrett. I want Chloe Reed. And I want that judge. I want to try them, and I want to end them." Anna walked back to her safe house that night, but something had changed. The months of grinding, painful reflection had forged her grief into steel. The weight of justice was no longer a burden for her to carry. It was a weapon, and it was finally ready to fall. The operation was set for a Wednesday morning. 6 a.m. AUSA Marcus Cole had secured every warrant, each one a legal blade sharpened by the evidence from Clara's bunker. Agent Jenkins had coordinated 4 federal tactical teams across 3 states. The whirlwind was set to make landfall. It began not with a bang, but with the quiet, professional click of 100 seatbelts in the pre-dawn darkness of the FBI field office parking lot. The first target was the beast's head, Astronova Pharmaceuticals' gleaming, glass and steel headquarters in suburban Chicago. At 6:58 a.m., a fleet of black SUVs rolled silently up the curved driveway. At 7 a.m. on the dot, as employees were trickling in with their morning coffee, a phalanx of agents and FBI windbreakers flooded the lobby. FBI, we have a federal warrant. The lead agent's voice boomed across the marble atrium. Nobody touch your computers. Hands off your keyboards, hands in the air. Employees froze, lattes and keycards in hand. The atmosphere of untouchable corporate power evaporated in an instant, replaced by panic and the raw, unadulterated fear of consequence. Analysts, who just yesterday were manipulating data, were now being led into conference rooms, their faces pale. The raid was a surgical strike, aimed directly at the executive floors and the server rooms, the building's brain and memory. At the exact same moment, 20 miles away, a different team used a battering ram on the oak-paneled front door of a $10 million mansion. Richard Price, CEO, was in his home gym, wearing a silk robe and sipping an espresso. He heard the crash and the shouts, FBI, warrant, and his first emotion was not fear, but pure, unadulterated offense. He walked out to his grand staircase to see a dozen armed agents securing his home. Do you have any idea who I am? He snarled at the agent who approached him. Yes, sir, the agent replied, his voice bored. Richard Price, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, securities fraud, and racketeering. The click of the handcuffs, locking around the billionaire's wrists, was lost in the cavernous foyer. He was led out past his terrified housekeeping staff, his silk robe flapping open, revealing the pajamas beneath. The whirlwind was also touching down in Denver. Agent Sarah Jenkins had personally reserved the third warrant. She walked onto the polished floor of a downtown tech incubator, her blazer sharp, her expression a mask of cold fury. Mark Garrett was in a glass-walled conference room, leading a presentation, a marker in his hand. He looked exactly as he always had, charming, confident, in control. Jenkins didn't knock. She opened the door. The presentation stopped. All eyes turned to her. Mark Garrett, she asked, her voice cutting through the silence. He smiled, a flicker of annoyance. I'm in a meeting. Can this wait? No, it can't, Jenkins said. She stepped aside. 2 uniformed agents entered behind her. You're under arrest for your role in the conspiracy to murder Eleanor Vaughn. Mark's blood drained from his face. The marker slipped from his fingers and clattered onto the table. The mask was gone. This was the man from the tape, the cold, calculating stranger. He looked past Jenkins, into the open-plan office, where all his new colleagues were standing, staring, their phones suddenly out and recording. You have the right to remain silent, Jenkins said, as the agents pulled his arms behind his back with practiced, impersonal force. The humiliation of the perp walk, past the whispered and D-pointed cameras of his new life, was the beginning of a sentence. The 4th team hit Chloe Reed's luxury apartment. She tried to cry. She tried to flirt. She tried to say she was a victim, that Mark had manipulated her, that she had no idea. The agents, who had all heard Clara's recordings of her calls, were unmoved. They catalogued her designer bags and shoes as she sat on her white velvet couch in handcuffs, her yoga smoothie unfinished on the coffee table. The final piece, the one that cemented the entire conspiracy, was Judge Robert Cunningham. He was not arrested at home. The team, led by AUSA Cole himself, waited until 9:30 a.m. They walked into the federal courthouse, past the metal detectors, and straight into Cunningham's chambers. He was already in his robes, preparing to take the bench. Judge Cunningham, Cole said, presenting the warrant. You're under arrest for accepting bribes from Astronova Pharmaceuticals and for obstruction of justice in the Garrett divorce case. Cunningham, the man who had wielded his gavel like a hammer, stripping Anna of her home, her money, and her dignity, simply sat down, his face the color of ash. He was told to remove his robes. Anna watched it all from the safe house. A local news helicopter was circling the Astronova building, the breaking news banner flashing across the bottom of the screen. Her burner phone rang. It was Jenkins. "It's done," the agent said. Her voice was flat, but Anna could hear the exhaustion and the satisfaction. "We have them all. Price, Garrett, Reed, and the judge. We have the servers. We have everything. Clara did it, Anna. She did it." Anna hung up the phone and looked out the window at the city. She felt no joy, no triumph, just a vast, quiet, and profound sense of an ending. The ghosts that had haunted her for 7 years had finally been exorcised by the light of day. The final act of her personal destruction was undone 3 weeks later. It was not a dramatic trial, but a quiet, administrative hearing in a new, clean courtroom in front of a new, impartial judge. A USA Cole's office had filed the motion. The judge, a stern-looking woman, read the summary of the evidence, the indictment against Judge Cunningham, the bank records from Astronova, the testimony of Chloe Reed now that she was cooperating for a plea deal. The judge looked at Anna, who sat alone in the gallery. "This court," the judge said, her voice filled with a quiet, controlled anger, "finds that the previous ruling in your divorce was not just a miscarriage of justice, it was a deliberate, criminal act of fraud. The ruling is vacated. But we are going further." She struck her gavel, the sound a clean, sharp crack that echoed in the room. "This court hereby declares the marriage between Anna Garrett and Mark Garrett annulled. Not dissolved, but erased. It is void from its inception on the grounds of fraud and conspiracy. Legally, Miss Garrett, this marriage never happened." Anna walked out of the courthouse into the bright Colorado sunshine, her steps light. She had lost her marriage, her friend, and her home. But in return, she had been given something she never thought she'd possess. She had her name back. She had the truth. And she had an inheritance of $14 million, waiting to be used. The trials began 18 months after the arrests. Justice, Anna learned, moved with the grinding, deliberate slowness of a glacier, but it was just as unstoppable. The mountain of evidence Clara had built, now cataloged and presented by the U.S. Attorney's Office, was insurmountable. Richard Price went first. His trial was a media spectacle. Dressed in immaculate bespoke suits, he maintained an aura of offended arrogance, as if the entire proceeding was beneath him. But the evidence, presented day after day, dismantled him. The Sarah trial data, the internal memos, the financial records, and finally, the tape of him ordering Eleanor's death. It was a public execution of his character and his crimes. The jury, unimpressed by his high-priced lawyers, took less than 6 hours to find him guilty on all counts, including conspiracy to commit murder. The judge sentenced the 62-year-old CEO to 23 years in federal prison. A life sentence, in practical terms. He was led away, his face finally shockingly blank. Mark's trial was quieter, but for Anna, it was the only one that mattered. She attended every single day, sitting in the back row, a silent, unmovable presence. Mark, his expensive suits now replaced by ill-fitting courtroom attire, tried to perform. He was the victim, the low-level employee manipulated by a powerful CEO, a man who had fallen in love with Anna but was trapped in a situation he couldn't escape. Then, a USA Cole played the tape. The courtroom was silent as Mark's own voice, cold and logistical, filled the air. "What about the blowback? She'll lean on me, which gives me more control. But there's the aunt. Clara." Mark refused to look at the jury. He looked, just once, at Anna. He seemed to be searching for the soft, forgiving woman he had married, the woman he had so expertly managed for 7 years. The woman who looked back at him, her eyes as cold and hard as the bunker's concrete walls, was a stranger. He was found guilty. The judge, citing his monstrous and parasitic betrayal, sentenced him to 15 years. Chloe, predictably, had taken a plea deal. In exchange for her testimony against Mark and several mid-level Astronova executives, she pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit fraud and obstruction of justice. She received a sentence of 8 years. Anna watched her being led away in tears, the first genuine, terrified tears Anna had ever seen her shed. The civil lawsuit against Astronova, now a broken and disgraced company facing hundreds of other claims, was settled quietly. The court awarded Anna $12 million in the wrongful death suit for Eleanor Vaughn. The check arrived at the federal building, addressed to her. Anna looked at it, then passed it to Marcus Cole. "I don't want it," she said. "It's yours, Anna. You deserve it." "No," she said, her voice firm. "It's blood money. It's the profit they made from Saracor." She donated every cent, splitting it between national organizations that advocated for pharmaceutical transparency and consumer safety. But the $14 million from her mother's trust, that was different. That wasn't blood money. That was her mother's foresight. That was her aunt's dedication. That was the war chest. 1 year later, on a clear, cool Denver morning, Anna stood at a podium in front of a modest, modern office building. The sign on the glass doors read, "The Eleanor and Clara Foundation." She had used the trust, her inheritance of truth, to build a new kind of arsenal. The foundation was a privately funded, nonprofit watchdog group, staffed with forensic accountants, private investigators, and a team of relentless lawyers. Its sole purpose was to do exactly what Clara had done: investigate corporate fraud, protect whistleblowers, and build the cases that federal agencies were too slow or too politically cautious to build themselves. Her new life was nothing like her old one. Her apartment was clean, minimalist, and overlooked the mountains. Her work was not about marketing dental offices. It was about dismantling corrupt systems. She had become a hybrid of the two women who had saved her. She had her mother's precise, analytical mind and her aunt's righteous, paranoid fire. She no longer looked over her shoulder. She was the one people like Richard Price now had to worry about. In her new office, on her clean desk, there was only one photograph. It wasn't of a wedding she'd never had or a friend who had been an operative. It was an old, faded snapshot from a family barbecue taken 20 years ago. In it, her mother, Eleanor, was laughing, her head thrown back. And beside her, Aunt Clara, holding a hamburger, was arguing passionately with someone just out of frame, her eyes bright with the familiar, crazy light of someone who sees the truth and isn't afraid to say it, no matter who refuses to listen. Anna looked at the photo, then turned to the window, watching the city move below. She hadn't gotten her old life back. She had never wanted to. She had built a new one from the foundations of a truth that had been buried in a concrete bunker, a truth her mother had died for and her aunt had lived for. And in this new life, Anna was, for the first time, finally and completely free.